Welcome to the Pardis channel. Today, we explain Genesis chapter 43 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We are going to unpack the intense human drama, the tense negotiations, and the emotional reunions that make this chapter so absolutely captivating. To do this, we'll follow a structured approach. We're going to cover the context of the famine, the brothers' return to Egypt, Joseph's feast and his hidden emotions, some quick textual clarifications, the key simple ideas, and we'll wrap up with some incredibly practical life lessons. Section 1. Context and the famine. Okay, let's just dive right into this. We open Genesis chapter 43 at verse 1 with a really grim reality. The text says, "Now the famine was still severe in the land here being Canaan, where Jacob and his family are living." And the text really doesn't mince words here. This isn't just a brief minor shortage. It's a severe, ongoing, literally life-threatening famine. Survival is the only thing on their minds. So where exactly are we in the broader story right now? Well, Jacob's family has completely eaten all the grain they brought back from their very first trip to Egypt. They are officially out of food. But there is a massive problem. The Egyptian governor, who, completely unbeknownst to them, is actually their brother Joseph, has previously laid down a strict demand. He told them that if they ever return, they absolutely must bring their youngest brother Benjamin with them. This was supposedly to prove they were honest men and not spies. And to make sure they complied, he kept one of the brothers, Simeon, locked up in Egypt as collateral. So they desperately need food, but returning means risking Benjamin. Section 2. Return to Egypt. This brings us to a really tense back-and-forth negotiation in verses 2 through 14. We're witnessing a profound, almost desperate conversation between a father, Jacob, and his sons as they literally faced starvation. In verse 2, when all the grain is gone, Jacob tells his sons, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But notice what he does here. He completely ignores the massive elephant in the room, Benjamin. He doesn't even mention him. But Judah immediately steps up. He emerges here as the definitive leader of the brothers. In verses 3 through 5, Judah flatly refuses to go. He tells his father very firmly, "The man warned us solemnly, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.'" Judah makes the situation completely binary. He says, "Look, if you send Benjamin, we'll go down and buy food. If you don't send him, we're not going, period." Jacob, referred to here as Israel, replies in verse 6 out of pure exhausted frustration. He asks, "Why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother?" And you can hear the desperation in his voice. The brothers, acting very rationally, explain in verse 7 that the man questioned them closely about their family. How in the world were they supposed to know he was going to demand the boy come down to Egypt? Then, in verses 8 through 10, Judah takes full command of the situation. He tells his father to send the boy with him so that they, their children, and Jacob himself might live and not die. Judah actually offers himself up to bear the blame forever if Benjamin isn't returned safely. He even points out the harsh practical reality in verse 10, saying that if they hadn't delayed with all this arguing, they literally could have gone to Egypt and returned twice by now. This specific exchange brilliantly illustrates the emotional gravity of the moment. Look at verse 9. Judah says, "I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him." Now think about this. He isn't offering to sacrifice his own children if he fails, which, by the way, is exactly what his brother Reuben foolishly tried to do in the previous chapter. No, Judah is taking mature personal responsibility. Because of this firm guarantee and, frankly, the undeniable reality of their starvation, Jacob finally surrenders in verse 14. It is this heartbreaking, incredibly reluctant surrender of his beloved youngest son. His final words on the matter are just devastating. "As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." He realizes he has done absolutely everything he can, and now he just has to let go. But before they leave, Jacob uses some serious practical diplomacy. In verses 11 through 13, he instructs his sons on exactly how to appease this mysterious, harsh Egyptian lord. He tells them to pack the absolute best products of the land in their bags as a gift. So what does he send? A little balm, a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts, and almonds. Now, these might sound like simple items to us, but these were high-value regional commodities that would have been incredibly rare in a famine-struck Egypt. Furthermore, he tells them to take double the amount of silver. Why double? Well, remember, they found the silver from their first trip placed right back into the mouths of their sacks. Jacob is assuming it was just some sort of administrative mistake, so he tells them to return the original silver and bring new silver to buy the new food. He is doing everything in his human power to ensure this goes smoothly. Finally, in verse 14, Jacob sends them off with a prayer. He says, "And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you." The Hebrew term used here is El Shaddai, which translates to God Almighty. Jacob has packed the gifts, he's provided the double silver, he's trusted Judah's guarantee, he's done the work. But ultimately, he acknowledges that he is not in control. He simply asks God Almighty to grant them mercy. Section 3, Joseph's Feast and Motion. So the men hurry down to Egypt. And this covers verses 15 through 34, which sets up an unbelievably tense reunion. Let's walk through how this builds, step by step. In verse 16, Joseph sees Benjamin with them, but he doesn't immediately reveal himself. Instead, he tells his steward to take the men to his house, slaughter an animal, and prepare a noon dinner. Now, when the brothers are taken to Joseph's house, verse 18 tells us they are absolutely terrified. They think it's a trap. They're thinking, we were brought here because of the silver that was put back into our sacks. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys. So right at the entrance of the house, before they even go in, they preemptively explain to the steward about the silver, assuring him, look, we brought it back, plus extra. The steward's response in verse 23 is fascinating. He says, it's all right. Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver. He just totally diffuses their panic. Then he brings Simeon out to them. The steward washes their feet, feeds their donkeys, and the brothers get their gifts ready and anxiously wait for noon. Now, what's really interesting here is the immense contrast in verses 26 through 31. When Joseph comes home, the brothers present their gifts and they bow down before him right to the ground. This is literally fulfilling the prophetic dreams Joseph had all those years ago. Joseph asks about their father, and he's completely maintaining the strict, distant governor persona. But then he looks up and he sees Benjamin, his own mother's son. In verse 29, he asks, is this your youngest brother? And then he blesses him, saying, God be gracious to you, my son. At this exact moment, that harsh facade completely shatters. Verse 30 says Joseph is deeply moved at the sight of his brother. He literally has to hurry out of the room because he is about to start crying. He goes into his private room and he weeps there, all alone. After he gets it all out, he washes his face, controls himself, walks back out, and simply commands, serve the food. Verses 32 and 33 describe the actual feast, and this gives us a brilliant look into the historical context of Egyptian culture at the time. They are served at 3 separate tables. Joseph eats by himself, the brothers eat by themselves, and the Egyptians eat by themselves. Why the separation? Well, the text explicitly tells us, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. It was a very strict cultural and religious boundary. But the brothers aren't just sitting randomly. In verse 33, they realize they have been seated before the governor in the exact order of their ages, from the oldest firstborn all the way down to the youngest. The text says they looked at each other in astonishment. I mean, imagine the look on their faces. How could this random Egyptian lord possibly know their exact birth order? And that brings us to a crucial point about how this chapter concludes in verse 34. When the portions are served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion is exactly 5 times as much as anyone else's. 5 times. Yet, despite this bizarre, obvious preferential treatment, the text tells us they feasted and drank freely with him. So why 5 times the amount? Joseph is initiating a silent test. Years ago, remember, the older brothers sold Joseph into slavery out of pure bitter jealousy because their father favored him. Now Joseph is heavily favoring the new youngest brother, Benjamin, right in front of their eyes. He is carefully watching them to see if they will react with that exact same destructive jealousy. Section 4, Textual Clarifications. Now that we've walked through the narrative step by step, let's clarify a few things. It is vital to reinforce that our explanation today relies entirely on the pashhat. That means the straightforward historical and literal context of the text. For instance, those Egyptian dining customs mentioned in verse 32, that is a known historical reality of ancient Egyptian societal boundaries. They genuinely considered foreigners, especially shepherds like the Hebrews, to be ritually unclean. Likewise, the steward's role in reassuring the brothers and managing the household logistics, that's a direct reflection of actual administrative practices in ancient Egyptian estates. We really don't need to add any deep mystical symbolism to understand this chapter. The human drama, the careful diplomatic gifts, the cultural clashes, it all makes perfect sense just by reading what is clearly written on the page. Section 5. Key, simple ideas. Let's step back for a second and look at the primary themes of chapter 43. This chapter is really a bridge. It takes us from deep, paralyzing fear toward eventual reconciliation. And we see 3 massive shifts happen. First, Judah's emergence as a true leader. He steps up with pure logic and real personal accountability, succeeding exactly where Reuben failed. Second, Jacob's painful lesson in letting go.
He tries so hard to control the situation with the gifts and the double silver, but ultimately he realizes he just has to release his grip on Benjamin and trust in God's mercy. And third, Joseph testing his brother's character. This entire elaborate setup, the feasts, the specific seat assignments, Benjamin's giant portion, it's all deliberately designed by Joseph to see if his brothers have actually changed since the day they sold him decades ago.
Section 6. Practical Life Lessons. So, why does all this matter for us today? Well, the beauty of the pashhat is that these ancient human struggles directly apply to our own lives. First, we learn about taking personal responsibility. Judah didn't make empty, dramatic threats to get his way. He simply said, "Hold me personally responsible." In our own lives, stepping up to lead often means putting our own reputation and well-being on the line for the sake of others. Second, making peace with things outside our control. Jacob did the work. He prepared the gifts, he got the money ready, but then he fully surrendered the outcome with his prayer to El Shaddai. We must learn to prepare diligently, for sure, but we also have to accept that we simply cannot control every variable. And finally, showing grace even when holding power. Joseph has total, absolute power over the men who literally ruined his early life. Yet what does he do? He makes sure their donkeys are fed, their feet are washed, their brother Simeon is returned to them, and they are given a feast. He restrains his immense power to give them the space to prove their growth. Let's do a quick recap. 1. Starvation forces the family to return to Egypt, but they absolutely must bring Benjamin. 2. Judah breaks the stalemate by taking personal, mature leadership and guaranteeing the boys' safety. 3. They arrive in Egypt to an incredibly tense but joyous reunion feast where they're seated by age and Benjamin is highly favored. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question. The brothers didn't act jealous at the feast, but how will Benjamin's extra portion set up Joseph's final ultimate test for his brothers on their journey home? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.